All right, episode 9 of Hanging with Daddy is on. It's going to be a little different. We're actually going to talk about football, which is weird for me. We don't tend to do that here, but it's Dynasty Trade Month. We are closing out Dynasty Trade Month with a great guest. We're going to bring him on in a minute, but first, you know what you're here for. Let's listen to the intro music.
Get down. Turn on the pod cause we looking at live right now. Peeling it back, take a quick look inside. All of these analysts, daddy gon' handle this. Know he's a baddie, I know he ain't bad at this. We gon' lay back, talking irrelevance. Why do all that? Just for the hell of it. Hanging with daddy. What's the vibe though? Late night vibes. Hanging with daddy. What's up, Mike? Turn it on right now. I got the remote now. Hanging with daddy. Let's go. Late night vibes. And we're hanging with daddy. Turn up. Turn it on right now. Daddy got control now.
From the best intro in the game, we are going to get to the best Dynasty player in the game. This guest is someone that I've followed for years, absolute years. He is an expert on Dynasty. You know him from DLF football. You know him as the inventor of productive struggle. I know him as one of my good friends, my boss, and my league mate. Like, how lucky do I get to be able to introduce this man, Ryan McDowell, to the show? Let's bring him on. Ryan, what's up, buddy?
Mike, how's it going, man?
Oh, it's going. How you doing today?
Man, I'm doing well. I don't know if I can live up to that intro, but I'm going to try. Glad to jump on here with you.
I am too. So luckily enough, we were able to record this show because your basketball team crushed my hopes and dreams. So I don't have to look at my bracket anymore. Actually, they were supposed to be playing right now. I actually it's 5, if I'm not mistaken. But here we are. So.
My team, I don't know. My team is the one who got crushed.
Yeah, and crushed my bracket because I had faith in you, Ryan.
Yeah, gotcha.
I had faith in you. I had them beating Kansas in the final because I remember we were talking when you went out there. I'm like, oh, let's just roll it again.
Yep.
And that ended quick. So here we are.
Yeah, it was a rough March Madness. It was a rough March Madness on the basketball front for me, for Kentucky fans, but the NFL has kind of made up for it with all the action, all the trades, all the signings. They've kind of made me forget about that Kentucky loss. So thanks for reminding me.
No problem. I think we started off on like a down note and then grow from there. That way the show can only get better. That's it's like a build up, right? But
that's fair.
It's funny. I remember it was March 1st. You had declared that it's a Dynasty Trade Month.
Yes.
Apparently the NFL got confused and thought it was just Trade Month. So this was absolutely amazing. So talk to me about, first of all, the recent moves. We're going to get into some trading and our strategies and stuff. But which one of these moves stuck out to you? Like, which one has you most excited or kind of, I guess, depending on how your roster looks, most depressed after kind of the smoke is cleared here?
As far as the NFL moves?
Fine, the NFL, yeah.
Gosh, it really is hard to narrow it down to one. I think you could pick any of those top 3 or 4 moves, and that would be the biggest trade ever, biggest signing ever in a full NFL season. And we got it all within a couple weeks. I guess the one for me, I think that has probably the most impact is the Russell Wilson deal. I think a lot of people, myself included, had gotten to a point thinking, okay, he's probably not getting traded. We keep hearing the Watson rumors and the Rodgers rumors, and everything had kind of died down with Russ, and then just out of nowhere to Denver. But as Dynasty players, we love those pieces in Denver, right? Judy and Sutton, and I guess we could have said Fant up until a couple weeks ago, but we just wanted all those young offensive players to get a quarterback. That's really all we wanted, and it's finally happened. So I think Albert O is a huge beneficiary to that move because obviously both of Wilson and Fant being gone to Seattle. And we get to see Judy and Sutton with a real quarterback now, and those are players that were certainly highly regarded coming into the league, and I don't think they've really gotten to show what they can actually do. They've lost some dynasty value because of that. Now we just need them both to stay healthy and show out.
Man, that's going to be such a pivot point for both players. I mean, I look at Jerry Jeudy. And I mentioned last year, and we, obviously looking at a lot of Alabama film with the amount of players coming out. And what I told everybody looking at the wide receivers last year was the biggest thing that stuck out to me was that Jerry Jeudy's that dude. Like, he was the guy on that team. And then you see Waddle showing out, you see Smith playing well, and Jeudy still kind of meh. Everyone wants to blame Locke. I get that. Drew Lock threw a ton of uncatchable throws to Jerry Jeudy. But now with the excuses gone, he needs to show up this year, I think, or he's going to fall into that, relative bust category if he doesn't ball out with Russell under center. I think this is now the spot where he has to show up this year.
I think so. And I think that's even more true with Sutton, who's, had a year or two on Jeudy as far as being in the league. And, Sutton got a new deal. Like you said, no excuses for these guys at this point. Let's see what they can do.
Absolutely. And for me, the biggest thing that I took out of it, just because I'm so heavily invested in Derek Carr, was him getting Devontae Adams. Literally changed the entire landscape of a few rosters I had where, you're playing super flex, you invest in skill players, you end up with the Derek Carrs, Kirk Cousins as your starters, and you're feeling okay about it. And then all of a sudden, 1 year, Cousins gets Jefferson, second year, Carr gets Adams, and all of a sudden I'm looking at, possibly 2 top 10 quarterbacks that you were getting in the 7th or 8th round of these super flex startups because they just aren't sexy. And man, that team might just blow up. I mean, they went from basically looking like they were dead in the water in the West to just seemingly picking up everybody in a week's time frame. And I can't wait to watch that team. That's going to be exciting with Josh McDaniels.
Yeah, I just love it. I mean, it's talked about everywhere basically at this point, mostly from the quarterback perspective, that the AFC is the haves and the NFC is the have-nots. I've kind of thought about it because this is how I think about everything fantasy football related. I think about it from a dynasty standpoint. And the AFC really feels like what dynasty football was like when I started playing like 10 or 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago now. But, in a typical league, a typical new dynasty startup, you might have 1 or 2 teams that were punting, and now we could say following the productive struggle, basically looking towards future years rather than current year. You might have 1 or 2 teams like that, and every other team was trying to win that title in year 1. And now it's almost reversed, So now dynasty feels like the NFC, where you've got 2 or 3 good teams and everybody else is thinking long term.
Oh, and it's wild because we're going to get into it in a minute, but the landscape of dynasty has changed, and I've been playing, probably roughly as long as you have. I think I'm on my 14th or 15th year now, and we started out, people were loading up on running backs. It was almost redraft for the first 2 or 3 years without people understanding the consequences, and it seemed like the people who got in front of the curve all of a sudden, probably by year 3 or 4, built out a dynasty. Then everyone caught up, and now it's shifted again. But it's wild to see the difference in play. And for me, I mean, when we look at dynasty, and the way I wanted to segue into really the point of this show is movement like this, and shaking everything up and changing everything is opportunity, in my opinion. Yep. For folks like us that are incredibly active in our leagues, to say, okay, how can I take all of these moves and all these narratives, and now how do I turn them into increased value for my roster? And I think you hit on it, pretty early on, which is, all right, Denver, where are you going to lay your bets? Right now, I will guarantee you that one of the 3 guys you mentioned, Sutton, Jeudy, or Alberto, is at peak value at this very moment. At this very second, they're at the peak value that they'll be at possibly in their entire career. If one of them just ends up falling off the cliff. How do you look at that, and how do you play that out? So I think for us now, let's kind of go through, hey, who are these guys that you're looking at that you're looking to either move or cash in on? Maybe some of the guys that people have left, a DK Metcalf, for example, or Tyler Lockett, is that a possible investment opportunity for you? So let's just kind of bounce some ideas off. Like who are give me a name of somebody that maybe you're looking to move right now because the narrative value has gotten higher than what you actually have predicted for their value.
Well, it's a great point, first of all, and I think you're absolutely right. You'll hear, I've heard it at least, or seen it mentioned on Twitter, a lot of dynasty players, a lot of fantasy analysts, just mentioning being overwhelmed with all the moves that have been made. And the reason for that is, at least from my standpoint, is not because there's so much news and it's so different from a normal year. It's because every single thing that happens, it's not just, okay, what's the new value of Deshaun Watson now that he's in Cleveland? It's what's the new value of Deshaun Watson and Nick Chubb and Amari Cooper and David Njoku and Davis Mills. Actually, the Watson one was a little different, I guess, because we kind of knew he was leaving, right? But in general, it's that player affects 3 or 4 or 5 players on his new team and 3 or 4 or 5 players on his old team. And now you've got to analyze 10 players. And whether you're a fantasy content creator or just a player trying to stay ahead in your dynasty league, you're absolutely right, Mike. Every move that's being made is impacting, up to 10 players, maybe even more, where those values are changing. So over the past week or two, I've been trying to do a major rankings update. I essentially started from scratch with my top 250 dynasty rankings. And I don't know, this was a horrible decision because I picked the wrong time to do this, right? Like, I think I've got a good grasp on it. I like where it's at. And then, even something as relatively small as like Jamison Crowder to Buffalo was a big mover. Crowder obviously up. Gabriel Davis, I guess that could be debated if he's moving up or down or staying the same. And then even a guy like Isaiah McKenzie, who was a kind of a sleeper, I would say, kind of gaining some steam in the dynasty landscape, is almost back to zero because of that move. So it really has been wild, wild west over the past 2 weeks. It's the name we've already mentioned a couple times, though, for me, that I think you might be right. He might be at peak value, is Alberto. And I think I felt like I was pretty aggressive in moving him up my rankings. I was pretty high on him already because I looked at that offense. I looked at what he had done when Fant was still in the lineup and just thinking, without Fant and with this quarterback upgrade, we could be looking at possibly a tight end 1 in Dynasty. And that wasn't aggressive enough, evidently, because he is, he's being ranked and valued, it seems, even higher than that. So when you talk about a player who might be at peak value and maybe it's time to take advantage of that value gain, I'm afraid it could be Alberto. And I say afraid because I like the player. I like him to improve and to produce, honestly, but will it match that value spike? I'm not so sure.
So I tried to throw a little cold water on Alberto, who, again, like you, I was all in last year. Big athletic tight end, definitely a player. Like, all the metrics show out that this could be a baller. But yeah, you're right. The fantasy world went crazy and overcorrected, like we tend to do at times. Yeah. And for me, I drew him analogous to a Ladarius Green, who was going to light the world on fire when we all remember getting burned by that.
We just need Antonio Gates to retire. That's it.
Exactly. And then he did, and then he didn't because Green couldn't get it done.
Green was honestly, Green was even worse. I mean, Green is a guy a lot of people have probably forgotten about. That's a great pull, though, because in our ADP, I think he got as high as tight end 5 or 6 in Dynasty ADP. And that was when Antonio Gates was still there. And it was all just based on hype. And then we saw Gates finally step away and Green gained even more value. And it was, it was one of those counting at twice examples, which we're trying to do with Javonte Williams right now. Yeah, I had to pull the ADP on Alberto. Tight end 13 right now in March ADP. So not quite as bad as I thought. Right behind Noah Fant. Interestingly enough, I would rather have Alberto than Fant, but that probably says more about Fant than it does about Alberto.
It certainly does not. I think the number poll that you just gave us shows us something that I think we see a lot where when we're doing ADP, and obviously I'm in a lot of those drafts with you and have been for a bit now, the general public doesn't overcorrect and doesn't tend to shift as quickly as analysts do. I think there's this desire to be first, or a desire to be the highest, or the stan of a player, whatever you want to call it, that leads to, I guess, more clicks than actionable advice, which, we could probably do a whole show on that.
Yeah.
But, I know in my home league, for example, you're not going to get tight end 5 value for Alberto. That 12, 13 sounds about right to where they're seeing it. The question is, does that shift in tide eventually catch up? And what are we going to be looking at in the July ADP? Like, is it a lagging indicator that eventually we'll see that pull up? Possibly. I'll say that at tight end 13, I'm absolutely in. There's no question.
I would be as well. I think there's some room to grow there for sure. I mean, moving ahead of Fant, who's directly ahead of him on our current data, would not be a shock. Then you've got kind of those younger guys, Knox, Gesicki, Schultz are the next 3. I would not be a surprise if he moved ahead of all 3 of those, honestly. So now we're talking about potentially as high as tight end 9. That's kind of where I see the ceiling for this offseason. I mean, if we get into the season and he lives up to all this hype and expectation, that's what I'm talking about as far as counting it twice, right? Like we move him up because Fant's gone and because he has a quarterback, and the expectation is now that he will produce like a borderline tight end 1. And when he produces like a borderline tight end 1, we move him up to a mid tight end 1. And in some ways these players can't ever live up to the hype. We just keep chasing it that way.
Oh, absolutely. And we are really good at that, and especially with these overly athletic players.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, it's funny, we talk about ADP, and one of the things that I've been trying to do, and I'd love to test it out on you and see kind of where you're at, because as I mentioned earlier, you and I trade a lot. Our valuations sometimes skew from each other, even though our startup valuations seem to be spot on. As the league goes on, we tend to find ways to make some deals. And there were a few things that I pulled off of your March early ADP. We had, looks like we released it on March 21st. And what I'll do is every time the early ADP comes out for each month, I'll give people 4 trades that you possibly could make, and in my opinion, should make immediately. And it gets people talking. It gets people unfollowing me at times, which is fine. Hope you enjoyed your time with me, but here we are. So let me roll out a couple for you for March and tell me what you're thinking. So the first one that I suggested was that people should be trading Elijah Mitchell straight up for Zeke Elliott. As you know, I'm very much a win now player, and I just don't trust the San Francisco offense. And I also don't think that we saw the best of Zeke last year. So I'm taking a guy who I know has the potential to be elite and giving up a couple years, because Elijah Mitchell's of the world remind me of the Trey Masons. They remind me of the Zach Stacy's, guys that maybe blew up because of a situation, but potentially are replaceable. And obviously we saw even San Francisco taking Trey Sermon early. So I loved what I saw from Mitchell. I don't like historically what I see from Shanahan, and I just don't think that Mitchell is ever going to be elite. I think he's going to be good. So that was a trade that I know raised some eyebrows because people are extremely down on Zeke. So talk me through kind of, if I offered you that trade, if I said, hey, I have Eli Mitchell, I want your Zeke Elliott, give me kind of your initial reactions on that move.
Yeah, I would say no, because I agree with you. I'd rather have Zeke as well. And honestly, everything you said about Mitchell, I think are fair concerns and reasons that I'm not necessarily buying in on him as well. You didn't even mention injuries. I've been saying about Mitchell that the good thing about Mitchell is that every time he came back from an injury last year, he regain that RB1 spot. So that's like, that's a check in his column there. The bad thing is he had to come back from injury 3 times because he had multiple injuries in his first season. And with Sermon there, I mean, you say what you will about his rookie season, obviously a major disappointment. I don't know that they're ready to throw away a mid-round pick like that. So I think at some point he gets some kind of chance. They bring back Jeff Wilson Jr. He's a player that always seems to find a role in that backfield. I'm just more worried about Mitchell's production moving forward. And I think outside of those elite running backs, and you're talking about the top 3 or 4, outside of those elite running backs, I'm viewing the running back landscape as redraft, basically. And I would certainly rather have Zeke in a redraft league than Elijah Mitchell. Maybe some would disagree with that as well. So if I want Zeke in redraft, essentially I want him in Dynasty. And even looking at that ADP, Aaron Jones is below Mitchell. I'd rather have Aaron Jones. Then you get into Dylan, Fournette, Clyde, Carter. I think James Conner even. I think all of those are conversations. And you can move Mitchell for Clyde plus or Carter plus or Fournette or James Conner plus. You can get a pick back on top of those or a prospect. Those are all moves I would consider doing.
I love it. And you hit a name that I love and what we'll talk about in a few, which is Fournette, who I think still, even with the new contract, people haven't gone high enough on that correction yet. And he's a guy that I'm picking up for peanuts in most leagues.
Love it.
So the next few that I grabbed are Twitter darlings that I'm considering trading away. Again, just based on ADP. First one is trading DJ Moore straight up for Chris Godwin is a move that I would make right now. I know a lot of people are high on DJ Moore. We're talking about 2 wide receivers who just got big-time contracts in the offseason. One obviously getting very good news with Tom Brady at quarterback, one getting not so good news with Sam Darnold at quarterback. Yeah. Where do you sit with these 2 guys? I know I believe DJ Moore at the time, and it may have corrected with the later returns on March ADP, but DJ Moore was going higher than Chris Godwin at the time that I suggested you make this straight up trade.
Yeah, so Moore is still going higher. Wide receiver 14, Godwin's wide receiver 17. Overall, separated by about half a round, a little bit more than that. So not a huge gap, but I do think you could make that trade in most leagues. For me, that's kind of a toss-up. I do have Moore ranked higher, so I don't know that I would make that exact trade. But I think Godwin has fallen too far too fast. We think of DJ Moore as a young player. He's not even 25 years old yet. But Godwin's only about a year older than him. And obviously, as you said, gets Tom Brady back. So it was the injury concern and the quarterback concern that led to this drop for Godwin since, probably October, November of last year, based on that, on that data. So I definitely still like the player. I probably wouldn't do the trade. Honestly, I probably wouldn't do it either way. Like, that's one of those where I would just keep whatever I have. If you want Godwin, offer me something else or something in addition. And I would say the same thing going the other way if I had more.
Interesting. So let me give you just a little quick on my reasoning and see if it resonates at all. My feeling is that DJ Moore in particular, the folks that have him rostered, have been holding on, waiting for that boom season. Like, you see the promise. So I think most people are probably on year 3 or 4 of rostering DJ Moore. And I'm starting to wonder when fatigue is going to set in. And we see this with players. You see Amari Cooper year 3 or 4 getting moved a lot more than he had been in his first 3 years, where people were building up on the promise. And now we're kind of seeing what Amari Cooper is. Which certainly isn't what we projected as a prospect. And I think with DJ Moore, I am expecting another year similar to what you've seen, which is good, but not, blowing the doors off of anybody by any means. I think that DJ Moore, when you look at his dynasty value, and you hit the nail on the head with running backs, DJ Moore is far more valuable in dynasty than redraft. He's not a guy I'm taking in redraft because of his current situation. But I'm wondering if fatigue would set in. And if realistically, if you made this trade now, for example, if you could get DJ Moore plus for Chris Godwin in the 2023 offseason, and that's what I'm always looking to do, is obviously increase value and potentially get a higher point year and be able to go possibly revisit the trade afterwards. So that was the thought process behind that deal. But again, I'm with you that I don't think there's a huge difference in value. I just think if you're active, you could cash in on a better year from Godwin this year, which I think hopefully most people are on board with Brady back now, that Godwin will have a better 2022 season at the very least.
Yeah, I think Moore really is an interesting player, and you're right that we've kind of been banking on the hype with him really the past 2 or 3 seasons. Looking at our ADP history app in let's see, August. No, I'm sorry. August. That's right. August of 2019, he is being drafted as the wide receiver 15. And he's been a top 15 wide receiver every month since. So we're talking about, 2.5 years essentially as a top 15 wide receiver. He peaked at the wide receiver 4. Let's see, about a year later, August of 2020. But he's never come close to producing at that level. So for whatever reason, we've been pretty patient with DJ Moore. And like you said, he's been good. He's not been a bust. He hasn't had those total clunker years by any means, despite his quarterback. So we're still holding out hope for him that he can jump into that elite range, into that locked in wide receiver 1 range. He just hasn't done it yet. And it's looking like he's not going to have a great quarterback upgrade this year either. So yeah, I certainly get the argument for Godwin.
Perfect. Now this one, just based on knowing you and knowing me and what we value, I think we're going to differ on this one. I truly do. And I'm going to be interested to hear your take. I would trade Amon-Ra St. Brown right now straight up for DeAndre Hopkins with zero hesitation.
Yeah, you're right. We differ on that one.
I knew it.
I think, at this point, we kind of know what Hopkins is, right? And that's a good thing. I mean, when he's healthy, when he's on the field, he's going to produce. He's 29 years old now. So this is the time when you start asking yourself, how much time does he have left? If he's following the Julio path, he's going to give us 2 to 3 more years at a pretty high level. So that's obviously a good thing. Amon-Ra St. Brown coming off a really impressive and honestly surprising rookie season, just 22 years old. They've already upgraded the wide receiver spot a little bit in Detroit. I think they'll add a rookie in there as well, at least one. So he'll have some more competition. You assume Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift back healthy in 2022, which is when they were out, obviously, and kind of infamously now, is really when St. Brown made a name for himself. It's probably closer than I would really want to admit, even for me. But yeah, I would still take St. Brown there.
And what I love about being in the league with you is this is where we always tend to differ. Is I do throw away years, and sometimes that'll bite me. There's no question about it. But as we talked about, we both follow Leo P and are big fans. Knowing your league mates is so important. And when I have a young player and I see an aging player on your roster, you're getting a text from me. I'm like, I think we have a match here.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, and you're right. Leo Pasiga has preached this for years. Not just knowing your league mates, but really putting in the work to document. He's famous in our little community for his fantasy notebooks that he keeps on every other manager in his league, and that definitely takes a lot of work. But it's also just kind of part of being a good league member, right? You have those conversations, whether it's on text or DM or email or whatever, and you just you try to keep track of that and learn a little bit about the other manager as a fantasy player, what their strategy is, and that's going to help you, and it might help them down the road as well.
Absolutely, and that's when we bring out the latest article on DLF, where we'll be talking about trade strategy. A lot of that comes from Leo and his notebooks. He and I talk about this extensively and kind of how important that is if you want to make a deal and maintain a relationship. Going into a deal, not only knowing how it might help the league mates team, but knowing the visuals for that person is important. Like, I know without a shadow of a doubt, if I sent you the reverse and I said, "Hey, I have DeAndre Hopkins, Ryan," we're not even talking. Like, I know how you play, and I know you're gonna be like, "Well, I don't want to hear a text from this idiot again," because he has no idea who I am. So I think that's a huge value add, and I think it's led to us making multiple trades. Now, here's the last one where I actually think you are going to agree with me because it does fade your way. And admittedly, this was before the Davante Adams deal. So, put a little asterisk there. And to be honest, I actually suggested this trade in August of 21. So it's been fairly par for the course for me. I got crushed. Actually, it was February, excuse me. I got crushed by suggesting this when I said that you should be trading Darren Waller for TJ Hawkinson. And to everybody who called me really derogatory names for tweeting that in 2021, how was last year? It couldn't have been great for you. And I apologize. So realistically, Waller for me is a player that it's funny because we talk about people not knowing how young Godwin is. I think people don't really realize how young Josh Jacobs is. What a lot of people don't put a lot of stock into is, number one, what a great story Darren Waller is to, get himself to be a superstar in the league.
Yep.
But also he's significantly older than people realize going into his 30-year season. And when I looked at his 28-year-old season, it looked a lot like Zach Ertz and Rob Gronkowski, who obviously had dips in production. Ertz coming back this year with his move to Arizona, but it's such a demanding position, such a difficult position. And Waller now getting to that age with tight ends where you're almost thinking, never mind, is there a Julio comp? You have basically Travis Kelce and then everybody else who's ever played the position, save for maybe Tony Gonzalez, fading at this point. So how do you feel about Darren Waller for TJ Hawkins? They're about a coin flip when I checked last in the ADP.
Yeah, they really are. Hawkinson 53 overall, Waller 55 overall. That's close enough for me that I am taking the young guy. You said earlier you don't mind giving away years at some point. I say it a lot that I like to buy years. So if I look at two players, I think they're going to produce in a similar range in the short term, meaning in the next season, then yeah, give me the younger guy. And I do expect that. I think Waller and Hawkinson can both be higher end tight end ones this coming season. Hawk is almost 5 full years younger. So, yeah, give me Hawkinson there. I think that's a trade you can make, though, either way in your league, a trade that could get done today.
Perfect. Yeah. And that's one that I think, depending on who you're talking to, somebody's going to be on either side of this argument.
Right.
And honestly, fairly strongly, I think you'll find that someone will be fairly strong on the Waller side and will be watching this going, these two have no idea what they're talking about. What has Hawkinson done compared to Waller? Like, there's some strong opinions on that particular player, which I always like to take advantage of. And again, if you know your league mates, if you know somebody who's high on Darren Waller, man, now's the time to be on the phone. I mean, I last year was, but now you still have that little, window of opportunity for people that are talking themselves into that Davante Adams, and I've seen this, right? I know you have two online, that Davante Adams is somehow good for Darren Waller. That's insanity.
Yeah, and Waller, for whatever reason, is one of those players who hasn't been talked about much, despite the, the ripples that are impacting him, namely Davante Adams. But going back to the age, I mean, you mentioned Kelce is 32, still certainly getting it done. We talked about Antonio Gates earlier, Tony Gonzalez. Those are guys who performed at a very high level, well past age 30, but they're also three of the greatest tight ends we have ever seen. So, now Darren Waller's 29 and a half years old. You've got to ask yourself, is he going to be in that group where when he's done, we consider him one of the greatest tight ends ever? I would bet against that, honestly, as good as he has been. And that's even without considering the Devontae Adams factor. So if I can pivot from Waller to Hawkinson, even if you're just moving to Kittle, which is they're all three kind of in the same range, you're getting a year back on Kittle.
Love it. I love it. So now we're going to talk about trade that I wouldn't make right now. And like we talked about the article coming out, we're going to put a disclaimer on this, but I'm just going to keep tweaking Raiders fans because it's fun. Sorry, Tommy Bo, I love you, buddy. I would not be trading for any non-elite running back pre-NFL draft. That's just asking for trouble. When you look at ADP, and I would suggest I wrote a tweet about this last year. I'll dig it up again for the trade article. When you look at ADP of a running back that you could make a trade for in March, the value almost never increases in April. What we tend to find is that people who have that running back, whether it be like a David Montgomery or a Josh Jacobs or that kind of middling running back, if they don't draft a running back, you don't tend to see value spikes. Where you only see value spikes is like Austin Eckler jumping because Melvin Gordon was moved. Obviously, that's a big deal. Like you were expecting Melvin Gordon to re-sign with the Chargers and you didn't. But what you find is that the fantasy community doesn't react to potential draft moves. They react when they happen. So you're really not gaining anything making the deal now. There really is no discount to be had today, only pain. So I'm suggesting against ever trading for running backs pre-NFL draft, but just for fun. We brought up two names here, and I want to give you another move that I would make that, again, goes against age, but I'm going to let you talk, and then I'll tell you where my head's at afterwards. Leonard Fournette and almost anything I would give up Josh Jacobs for.
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy. As I said earlier, I'm kind of in that mode of if they're not elite, I'm thinking short term only. I'm thinking 2022 only. I don't think Josh Jacobs is elite. He is 24 years old. Fournette's 27. Despite the upgrade that we've seen in Vegas with the Raiders this offseason, I still think it's pretty clear that I'm trusting that Tampa Bay offense more. Ronald Jones is gone. As of this recording, Gio Bernard is gone. Like it's really just Keyshawn Vaughn and Fournette. So somehow Fournette got an upgraded situation out of this. I feel even better about him. I'm with you. I guess my only hesitation would be I don't think Jacobs' value is necessarily all that high. So I wonder what that second piece you could get with Fournette is. I don't think you would get a ton, but I like the idea in general.
Yeah, so I'm thinking I'd be targeting maybe like a second. Is what I expect for a turn, and we could turn that into something, especially with the deep draft like this. That's a move that I'm willing to make. Now, running backs, what I want to touch upon with running backs is, it's funny, wide receivers, we do talk about age. Tight ends, we talk about age. Quarterback, not so much. I mean, quarterback seems to be a position you can get a lot of longevity on. You're starting to see that roll into the late 30s and early 40s. Running back, to me, the most important thing I look at for running back, and I always say this, it's not the date on their birth certificate, it's the date on their contract. How many years do you have left on that contract? And what you're seeing is particularly running backs like Jacobs, whose skill set isn't necessarily valued in the NFL, could see a dip. And it's funny, the guy that I used to use as a comp until he emerged again in Tampa was Leonard Fournette, that, he was riding high for quite some time and then dropped off. But now Fournette is a 3-year deal. And if I'm not mistaken, Jacobs has 1 year left on his rookie deal. They've brought in Kenyon Drake. Is it possible they bring in another running back, a rookie this year? There's options there. But I think that there's question marks with him moving forward that don't necessarily translate to birth date. But with the contract not being in place, that where is he going to land? And what we're seeing in particular with these rookies coming in, Ryan, and there's been a lot of talk about this, there's not a lot of, I guess you'd call, juicy landing spots anymore. What, Houston and Atlanta, maybe, where you're going to get 250 carries, or you're going to have to battle with someone who's an established NFL running back. I mean, the landscape isn't what it used to be, where there'd be 5 or 6 open spots, where Jonathan Taylor landed in a gold mine. in Indianapolis, right? And then you couple that with Marlon Mack's injury, and you have the dynasty running back one, with the bullet. I just don't see that anymore, and it's probably going to be even worse next year when Jacobs is looking for a new deal.
Yeah, 100%. On the Locked On Dynasty podcast last week, Matt Williamson and I went through every single NFL backfield, just looking for ideal landing spots for Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, as well as Melvin Gordon, kind of the really the notable free agents still out there. Mm-hmm. And of course, we talked about Atlanta and Houston as teams that still have a need. They're also going to be teams that we expect to be pretty bad in 2022. Beyond those three players are going to wreck. They're going to wreck a backfield, and they're going to wreck some dynasty value. And I mean, more and more, it looks like Gordon might just stay in Denver and really draft some people crazy that are relying on Javonte Williams. And I mean, for the record, I don't think we're going to get any discount on Javonte Williams. I would still expect him to produce and be a high-level dynasty asset if Gordon goes back there. But in general, these three players are going to shake things up in the running back landscape. And that's why you're 100% right. Outside of, I'm talking about two or three guys. Outside of those, outside of Taylor, outside of McCaffrey, right? Like, I mean, we can't go much lower than that. I mean, Najee Harris, I think is pretty safe based on the capital they spent on him.
Maybe Swift is the other guy, I think, right?
I think so, but I mean, Detroit has, of course, they brought in Jamal Williams last year. They draft Jamar Jefferson late in the draft. I don't think they view Swift as that every down back. I mean, certainly that's pretty obvious at this point. So, I mean, even a move, if they look at Melvin Gordon and they think, okay, Melvin Gordon is an upgrade on Jamal Williams, then that could be a move they would make. And I think that would, certainly wouldn't kill Swift. It wouldn't kill Javonte Williams if Gordon goes back, but it would have an impact.
Absolutely. And I think that Gordon, for me, as someone who's high on Swift, I actually wouldn't hate that, because I agree with you. I think they're looking at Todd Gurley. They're looking at Christian McCaffrey as like cautionary tales for a player like Swift, and seeing what a weapon he is, that they're not going to use him between the tackles as much as maybe fantasy players would like.
Well, and you talked about it earlier. I mean, you go back to when we started playing Dynasty, and it really did feel like a redraft. There were 10 or 11 running backs drafted in the first round. And then it was the giant shift, and that's around the time of productive struggle. That's when Sean Siegel coined zero running back as a redraft strategy. And many dynasty players kind of took that, kind of borrowed that as a strategy for themselves in dynasty startups. And then we've seen the shift back over the past 2 to 3 years, mostly because of that 2017 class that gave us, Kamara and Fournette and Cook and Mixon, and Aaron Jones was in that. Austin Eckler was in that, although he wasn't a highly drafted guy at the time. But that 2017 class really changed things. And now that they're aging past that first contract, as you talked about earlier, now we're seeing the shift back away from running backs towards wide receivers. And that's why you're exactly right. Just trading for one of these running backs now, like trading for Antonio Gibson right now. I love Gibson. I think he's super talented. Would it shock me if they signed Melvin Gordon or drafted Breece Hall in the second round? It would not shock me.
Nope, not at all. And Gibson's a guy that I have been huge on at the value we're getting him last year's draft. But now, again, people are really high on Gibson and, not choosing to put blinders on what the risk is.
Yep.
And you mentioned earlier too, and I just want to make sure that we are on the record about Javonte Williams. At least in Kitchen Sink 3, no, there will not be a discount on Javonte Williams, okay, regardless of what happens with Melvin Gordon. Yeah, so if you send me a text after Melvin Gordon signed, we talk about knowing your league mates. I still have 4 years on Javonte Williams. I remember you and I think, went head-to-head on him, and when you pivoted to Mac Jones I had the biggest smile on my face because I didn't know how far we were going to beat each other to get to Javonte, but we got him pretty high up there. I mean, I paid quarterback prices for him, and honestly, still don't regret it. But man, that was a stressful part of the deal. So I do want to talk about KS3 because you are, and I've been trying to take advantage of this. You are going into a rebuild. I actually just wrote, as you know, came out last week, kind of what to do with the rebuild, how to do it, when to do it. And I think you went really hard into a rebuild from what looked like a competitive team, at least on paper at the beginning of the year. And I think you recognized and pivoted quickly to the rebuild, which led to us having a flurry of trades. But how are you feeling right now? I mean, you have Dynasty assets, you have Devy assets, like you flipped Young quick with still a few kind of anchor plays, if I'm remembering correctly. Lamar Jackson and Austin Eckler are still hanging out, but mostly when fairly young, and you have a pretty deep taxi squad right now. So how are you feeling about where you're at in that league in terms of what's now the start of a rebuild for you?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty strong, and you're totally right. I mean, this time last year, I looked at that team. It had been a playoff team for several years running, honestly, and had a lot of good pieces that I thought that would continue. We made a couple trades, and we can get into those. We made a couple trades based on that, and ultimately that I think probably impacted my 2021 season going the wrong direction. I mean, it's easy to make excuses, I guess, when you don't succeed in fantasy football. But honestly, I just had a lot of guys who either struggled, got hurt, something didn't go right for their season and for my season, and ended up having to kind of tear it down, like you said, pretty quickly. I know it got to a point where, I mean, I just kept losing. I finally told myself, and we played double headers in this league, I finally told myself, if I lose these 2 games this week, I'm making moves. And I did. And it looked like I was out of the playoff hunt. If maybe I could have snuck into the playoffs, but I didn't have a championship team. So I think I made 4 or 5 trades within just a few days span. And that's kind of how my trades go. Like I will almost be quiet or dormant for weeks at a time sometimes. And then I'll make 3 or 4 or 5 trades really quickly. And time was not on my side. We're talking, this is like week 8 or 9, the trade deadline's coming up. My team it's pretty obvious to anybody who looked at it at that point. I was in trouble. I needed to move those young pieces. This is a contract league. I don't know if we've mentioned that yet, but clearly I wanted to get those players that were going to be expiring. I wanted to get some value for them before I had to make tough decisions. So I'm feeling really good about where I am right now. I haven't done a rebuild in a kitchen sink league maybe ever. I've definitely done some productive struggle where I started out slow and built up, but as far as tearing it down and starting fresh, I've not done that in any of these 5 kitchen sink leagues. So I'm excited to give it a shot.
I love it. So yeah, let's talk about, before we dive into some of the deals that we made, let's talk about this league. It is a contract league. You're able to sign players that are in the NFL for 1, 2, 3, or 4-year deals. So you're able to keep them for that amount of time. Any player that's not currently in the NFL or on their rookie year are able to be taxied for 1 season in the NFL before you have to move them on a deal. We'd mentioned Javonte Williams. I kept on my taxi squad, so I have 4 years coming of him starting for year 2. And then, as we talked about, there is, I believe we mentioned this, there's a franchise and a transition tag that allows you to basically keep 2 players that have expired contracts on your roster for as long as you can, and then 2 restricted free agents. With, honestly, for this conversation, doesn't matter much, but I did want to mention the tags because our beginning trades were predicated on those tags existing.
Yeah.
So what happened was, to give the background of where me and Ryan matched up very quickly, was I was on my first year of this league, coming off of the dispersal draft. And what gives you value there is that you don't have any expiring contracts coming off of the dispersal. I was able to assign contracts to every single player for whatever length of time I wanted to keep them. So if the dispersal asset was put back in, had a 1-year contract, that was irrelevant at this point. You're able to sign them as if they're free agents for up to 4-year deals. So the first thing that I had noticed when I had texted with Ryan was that he had players that were getting up there in age. Again, know your league mates, that were coming up at the end of their contracts. And I think the first 2 players, Ryan, that we talked about were Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, that the initial conversation led to me landing Kelce essentially in a deal. And this was really early on. This was July for everyone who wants to look at what happened for the season. But we came together, and you got Trey Sermon on a rookie deal, which means he was able to be taxied, Allen Robinson for 4 years, and Logan Thomas, if I remember correctly, for 2 years. And what I was able to pull was Kirk Cousins for 3 years, and Travis Kelce was going to cost me my franchise tag. And I did get a 2nd-round pick. To be clear to everybody in this league, this is Devi depleted. A 2nd-round rookie numbers wise is minimal value. It gave me a few bucks, but realistically it became Kelce on a expiring contract, Kirk Cousins on a deal. This is super flex for Sermon, essentially for 5 years, Allen Robinson for 4, and Logan Thomas for 2. So talk me through. Obviously I could very easily explain my side of things. I needed a quarterback that was stable. Kirk Cousins brought that, and Travis Kelce is Travis Kelce. I was in a unique position that you were not, where I wasn't risking losing anybody for Travis Kelce. I believe for you, if you didn't trade away Travis Kelce, it would have been maybe Austin Eckler, who was hitting the free agent board. So you were in a position where you couldn't keep all of your guys. So Travis Kelce for you had to be expendable in order to keep Austin Eckler. So if you want to be fair for your roster, add Austin Eckler to your side, because he was going into the pool if you didn't. And I believe it was Joe Mixon was also an expiring deal at that time on your roster as well. So what were you thinking about this deal? Because I was giving up, and it's funny, we look back now, but giving up Sermon on 5 years was the one that was making me, extremely nauseous at the time.
Yeah, I think this was actually our 2nd deal that we made. We'll have to backtrack and hit that first one.
Was it? Did I jump around?
I like the first one a little better than this one. I don't blame you for starting with this deal, because it definitely did not go my way. Yeah, like you said, your side is pretty obvious. You're getting a starting quarterback in a super flex league, and on a pretty nice contract. You're getting the best tight end in the game, or close to it, in Travis Kelce, even if it is just for 1 year. And that's really what it boiled down to for me, was that I had too many guys, too many talented players on short contracts, either 0s or 1s, and I wasn't going to be able to keep them all. So it was just a matter of trying to get some kind of value for those players with low contracts. And of course, Allen Robinson ended up having a horrible year, but I mean, this time last year, we were still looking at him certainly as a top 20 wide receiver, if not maybe even a little bit higher than that. And the idea of having him for 4 years, kind of locked up on that long-term deal, felt pretty good. Logan Thomas was coming off that breakout year. Maybe we think maybe he's the next Darren Waller. Those were the conversations that were being had. He's not, as we know now. And Sermon, it's funny. I didn't really want him. I mean, I wasn't one that bought into the Sermon hype. I wasn't drafting him in the first round like some people. But in this deal, it was like, yeah, I'll take a shot on the young running back. So that deal did not go my way. I don't think I mentioned I had some quarterback depth. That's kind of what allowed me to move Cousins. But ultimately, I mean, that deal was not a good one for me.
No, and it's funny. I did think I did them in order, and you're right. There's one where you got me, so we'll get into that in a second. But for me, what was simple was, and again, I want to make sure everyone knows in a contract league, things can be so much different. When I looked at my roster, I was essentially picking up Travis Kelce on a 3-year deal.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, I had no players that I thought were tag worthy coming up for 3 years. Obviously, with the dispersal being what it was, I put all my best players on 3- and 4-year deals, whether it's Kamara, Deebo Samuel. All of them went on to long-term contracts. So I said, well, Travis Kelce at the time was, I believe, 30, maybe 31. I signed him through his 34-year season. We'll figure it out at that point. So that was the move. But you're right. I had that was a month after, and I had them backwards. Our first deal. Now, our first deal, now let me preface this, I had been in the league for about 3 weeks at this point. And, much like in prison, I decided to get into a fight with the biggest guy in the league to show people who was boss, and decided to make a trade with Ryan. And this one was 3 players I'm really not high on. But I think, Ryan got good value on for 2 players that are older. And I got Odell Beckham, if I'm not mistaken, was on a 2-year deal at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I got Tyreek Hill, who, again, was requiring a tag. As we talked about, there were 2 tags. I had 2 openings, were covered. I gave up 5 years of Cam Akers, 4 years of Amari Cooper, and 5 years of Tylan Wallace. I was trying to make the deal, Akers and Cooper, straight up for the 2. Ryan held out for Wallace at that point to get the extra.
What a move! What a move that was.
It still could be. I still have some hope. But realistically, this started what was what became a trend of players we decided to trade getting hurt. Started with Cam Akers and eventually rolling into me getting Odell Beckham and James Robinson. So we cursed a few guys. But this deal, honestly, made a ton of sense, I think, for both of us. Tyreek Hill being a star in the league, Cam Akers being an up-and-comer, Amari Cooper on a long contract. And again, like we talked about, you were looking to buy contract years, and I had openings. So for this one, kind of, what was the kicker for you? I mean, Cooper and Akers are both big-time pieces. Was there one that was drawing you more than other at that point?
It had to be Akers at that point. Of course, that was pre-injury, and the hype was honestly getting out of control with talk of him pushing JT as the top overall running back at that point. And the chance to have him for 4 years. Again, just those contract years played a big part in making that deal for me. And while I lost that one in the short term, I think, with Tyreek having another big year, still locking both of those guys up, Akers and Cooper, on long-term deals is one I still feel pretty good about. So I think you're right. It really did benefit both of us. And that's the one thing I love about these leagues. Contract leagues, auction leagues, there's so many pieces that you can trade. It's not as simple in maybe a typical league where, a win now team and a productive struggle team and those match up. But other than that, it's tough to trade with people. There's that aspect to the league. Plus, maybe you really want rookie money this year, and I'm going all in on Devy guys, and we could match up that way. Or, my low contracts for studs versus your high contracts for second or third tier guys. Just so many ways to make a deal in these leagues.
Oh, and I love that. One of the deals I made that wasn't with you that had huge ramifications was I had moved Kamara on a 4-year deal, a player I'd picked up in dispersal I thought was a value pickup, just not a player I've ever been a fan of, to be quite honest. And I traded it for Aaron Jones and a lot of rookie money, which led to putting me over the top for Javonte Williams. Now, again, if you look at Aaron Jones on a 3-year deal compared to Kamara on a 4, you lose that trade. But the ancillary impact to my team was Javonte Williams, Mac Jones, and Zach Wilson, I believe, were the 3 that we had available. And then Kennedy grabbed Wilson right out of the gate, like he shot him through the roof. And then you and I were left, battling Mac Jones and Javonte. One of us was going to get one of us was going to get the other, and it was worth kind of, for me, the drop down to Aaron Jones from Kamara. I wasn't expecting Dylan to have quite the impact he had, to be quite honest, when I made the deal. But that was, again, a deal that kind of made sense because the two of us that were making the deal with the rookie money we had weren't really getting anywhere. Like there wasn't enough money on the individual rosters to make a big splash. So combining them made sense. And for me, landed me the player that I had my eyes on, as you know, and, eventually landed. But then we got to one of my favorite stories, which is, we get to the week 8 trade, like you talked about. And so this is when Ryan caused a fight between me and my girlfriend. We were out walking our dog, and the text comes in, and the text that every trade addict like myself wants to see, which is, I'm going to rebuild. Let's make a deal. And I look at my phone, and me and my girlfriend are walking the dog, and I must have fallen like 4 blocks behind during the walk because I didn't want to lose out on what became a horrific trade for me, if we're being honest. Expiring contracts. I picked up Adrian Peterson, who I believe played like 1 more game, if I'm not mistaken, if that. I picked up James.
He was the throw-in. He was the throw-in.
He was, but I like to, let's be self-deprecating at this point. I picked up James Robinson, who tore his Achilles about 4 hours later. And I picked up Big Mike Williams, who went from wide receiver to one to wide receiver 21 almost instantly for 2 second-round picks. Again, we've talked about those, minimal money, but still worth it. But all my Devy spots. And I was all in at the time. I believe I was the 2nd best team in the league. You were looking to rebuild it. It made a lot of sense. And, Devy for me is still something I'm getting used to. Not something I tend to dive into as heavily as I should. So probably picks I may have blown anyway. But for you, all these guys were contracts that you weren't picking up, all expiring. And honestly, we thought it was going to be another short-term, long-term deal. Unfortunately for me, it didn't quite work out that way, and I came up short of a championship. But at the time, it felt like a perfect trade, and I'll probably be keeping Mike Williams. He is a restricted free agent. I can't imagine him getting bid up through the roof based on what he's done. So probably a player I'll keep on my roster. James Robinson, I might be able to just slide through because of the injury and keep my fingers crossed. I'm not expecting much. But overall, you certainly got the better of me on this deal. And like we said, set you up to be, a really heavy player in the Devy draft we have coming up, I believe, in a month or so. So, this deal, it felt like was pretty obvious for you that you were going to get the best you could for these pieces, no matter what.
Yeah, I think anytime you get those in-season deals between a contender and a rebuilder, I mean, the goal should certainly be, and really it should always be, but especially in these types of deals, it should be a win-win deal. Help push you over the top, push me further down the ranks, and get me ready for the offseason. And unfortunately, for your side, it didn't really go that way. You didn't get the production you had hoped. For me, though, that was one of 4 trades I made that week. So James Robinson, Mike Williams, Adrian Peterson, all of those guys were in the last year of their contract. Robbie Anderson and Ben Roethlisberger were as well. I got some Devy spots, rookie money, Devy money for those players. And then the big trade I made, Nick Chubb, Michael Thomas, and Mike Davis for Jerry Jeudy, a first-round rookie pick, and some more Devy assets. So, in the end, kind of the culmination of all those trades is I'm going into the offseason with not that many players on expiring deals. I still have Lamar Jackson, Austin Eckler, Michael Gallup. I've got to figure out a way to keep those guys. But I have the most rookie money in the league and the most Devy money in the league, which even if you don't play in those formats, you can tell that's probably a good thing. I'm going to get, hopefully, fingers crossed, be able to kind of control both of those auctions and at least get the 1 or 2 guys that I really want.
And this is what I absolutely love about this particular league and the way you do it. There's so many great things about the Kitchen Sink League. And I know you had some openings come up, and I told people these are one of my favorites. But what you hit upon was that you have a ton of rookie money. I have a decent amount. I think I'm somewhere around 4th or 5th. But I'm behind 2 teams that are rebuilding. And for me, the rookie money also allows you to bid on those restricted free agents that we talked about and make sure that we can match. So what I'm hoping is that we don't have a repeat of last year, and that we're going after different targets in the coming season. I've already kind of made my list of who I think is going to get protected and who isn't, who may be out there. But certainly I have enough money to protect my guys if I choose to, if it's Mike Williams, if it's James Robinson, whoever it may be. And between you and I, and let's see if the other league mates are looking at it, I have floated the idea of maybe seeing if I can get Tyreek through the restricted free agent auction, match that, and then sign him to a longer term deal with some of the guys I have coming up that may need the tag next year, where I'm much happier with the rookie money. I mean, when we look at the depleted draft this year, I didn't see a ton of rookies, not like last year. You didn't have a ton of 2022 prospects that came up that were surprising. So I'm not certain that next year I'm going to be so free with my rookie money. But this year, if I don't see that, hey, when I look at the protections, maybe I do float Tyreek Hill and just use all that money to flip him from a tag to a deal. There's so much complexity to it and so much thought that goes into it that it makes it fun. But I'm about a year away from probably having to protect that tag. And to be honest, I wouldn't mind, just being the trader that I am, having a free tag to play with some of those teams that maybe haven't been so smart with their rookie money, because we do see that fly around a little more than it should, with people forgetting you can't protect your players if you don't have that.
Absolutely. And you're right. Not only do you have to figure out what you want to do, you kind of have to predict and project what other managers and other teams may do with their off season as well. That's another reason I really like the leagues. And I mean, for me personally, I have to look at my team and think, is this going to be a long-term rebuild where I'm trying to be competitive again by, 2024? I think for me, it's probably more short-term, because I do still have some nice pieces. Again, it's a super flex league. I've got Lamar Jackson and Deshaun Watson. That's a pretty good start. Of course, Watson is one of those pieces that didn't go well for me last year, obviously, but I also have Mac Jones and Tua. I have Malik Willis already, grabbed him last year in Devy. CJ Stroud, who could be the first overall pick this time next year, I have him as well. Akers, Eckler, Dillon, Sanders, Judy, Cooper, A-Rob. It's been a pretty good off season for me. So I think what I'm trying to get at here, Mike, is I think we might be going after the same guys again this year. I'm going to try to get back in the running this coming season and not sit at the bottom of the ranks.
And I was hoping you weren't going to say that, because as you know, I've been calling you about Lamar Jackson nonstop. And
yes.
One of the things that would have me willing to float Tyreek Hill through that restricted free agent auction is if I was able to grab Lamar Jackson and know that I could keep him on a longer deal. But yeah, you're right. You're probably further along than you should be with those assets. And I'm going to have to find a little more money. I mean, you have the two teams now, they're at the 600s. I'm only $60 out of third place, and as you know, that's real easy to make up. I think I picked up 400 in rookie dollars last year by making moves. Maybe I'll do the same just to make sure you can't get my guys. But yeah, no, I think this is leading into a fascinating off season, and teams are in. Some teams, honestly, are in disarray with what we've seen. I mean, we're seeing a lot of teams that, with the change in the guard at quarterback, like people are short on QBs right now. And, looking forward, there might be some moves there. But I think, we probably are both looking at the same thing, like licking our chops, looking at folks that maybe are in a little bit of trouble. And I do think when I look at the moves you made, I would say this could be a half-year rebuild for you, and we can make the flip. And like we've always talked about with rebuilds, the point is to win, not just to rebuild. So if you have that window of opportunity, you should hit it hard. But if you want to flip some of those taxi assets, you're going to get a fortune back on what's an already decently stacked team. I didn't completely strip you for parts last year. And then, like we talked about, you have Akers coming back from injury as well on these deals. So what you did, I think, at mid-range last year, really hit all the points of a rebuild that we talked about in the article. You hit fast. Like you said, 5 trades in a week before anybody could jump into the fold and know what you were doing. You were already done. I mean, that's key, right? As supply and demand. If you have 3 teams flooding the market with assets, you're all going to get less. Like every one of you is going to get a 75% of value deal from me and see who blinks first. And as you know, someone always will. But in this case, you were the only one blowing up my phone despite my efforts otherwise. So I'm sitting there and you're the only one bidding on the assets I have. So we had to come to that kind of mutual agreement on, what good value is. So it's going to be a fun year. And I'm hoping you don't completely catch me this year, but the possibility is absolutely there.
I'll give it a shot.
So let's talk quickly. Is there anybody you're looking to move that's still on your team right now? Well, I got you here.
Yeah. Man, anybody really. I could go. Like I said, I think I could still go either direction. I think a lot of my wide receivers have gained value this offseason, which is good because I didn't and I still don't have any of those top tier guys. But Judy, Cooper, and Robinson, I think, have all gained value due to the moves that their teams have made or that have been made with them. I would say I'm probably looking to move a quarterback. I don't know that it's Lamar Jackson, but again, I rattled off the names and I've got some depth there. So quarterback is probably the spot where I'm looking to trade off of, I would say. I do have Jared Goff. I don't know if I mentioned that name.
You did.
Okay.
And I the last thing I need is a middling quarterback because I have Derek Carr for 3, Kirk Cousins for 2, and Ryan Tannehill for 3, and also Jameis Winston for 1. So I'd be looking for.
So is that your normal strategy in Superflex to kind of grab multiple second, third tier guys versus the stars?
Yeah, I mean, basically, yeah. I tend to play the board as best I can, and as you know, coming out of the draft, there was just so many quality skill players. So what you had was we had 3 people in the dispersal. Try to keep it brief so we don't bore people. But we had Steve Osgood, who went very heavy quarterback and tight end. Then we had Turd Ferguson, who went basically productive struggle. And it became very clear to me that there was, obvious strategies. And I don't go in ever locked into anything. I go in saying, as a former poker player, I'm not playing the cards, I'm playing the man. Whoever is across from me. And in this case, the skill positions became valuable. So when I walked out with Kamara, when I walked out with Allen Robinson and Cooper, as we talked about, I walked out with, I had a Deebo Samuel came out of the fold for relatively cheap. Leonard Fournette, Kareem Hunt, and then I got Bijan Robinson and George Pickens, who I had moved eventually for J.K. Dobbins and some other pieces as well. It became obvious to me that I could just fill up in those areas that I had minimal competition.
Right.
So it became pretty simple to me. But yeah, I'm always comfortable floating those mid-range quarterbacks once I get out of that top tier, which didn't exist. So to give you an idea, like I was doing this one at the same time I was doing pigs. If you ever want to see me completely out of my mind doing those 2 options at the same time, I was absolutely losing it. But when it came to pigs, I was doing almost a completely different build where I was picking up quarterbacks in those leagues. And I was lucky enough to make the playoffs in both, like it worked out. But with this one, when I saw Steve going really heavy on quarterback and I saw, I said, Turd Ferguson going productive struggle, it just gave me that sweet spot. And I knew I'd be able to grab those kind of middling assets. And especially in this league, they didn't do too bad. And man, with Jefferson being what he's become, Kirk Cousins, like we said, looking up. And then we just talked about in the offseason with Derek Carr. I'm looking pretty good considering that Ryan Tannehill was basically a miss for me, but still, some value there.
Oh, yeah.
It's enough given the squad that I put together in those skill positions to make it work. But I'd love to now go to a team that doesn't necessarily have a haul at quarterback and try to turn two of those into kind of that next talent. That's why I've been calling you about Lamar Jackson. I'd love to get, maybe a Josh Allen type. Like I think now the team is settled in a way that I have four and other people are struggling. If I could turn, 2 quarters into $1, that was absolutely what I'd love to be doing next.
Sure.
Possibly add some pieces. But like you said, for you, it's not the greatest fit because you do have depth at that spot. So when I was looking at Jackson, it was more, hey, what do I have to give you? And, toying with the idea of floating, maybe a J.K. Dobbins type level player, or, Javonte Williams, obviously I need a ton for given the contract that he's on. But for you, would be more, hey, maybe we can make a skill position move, and then I'd have to flip the quarterbacks elsewhere. So it would probably be more of a 3-team deal if we were to get something done to land Lamar. Because trust me, I looked up and down your roster. I love Lamar Jackson, and it's a terrible negotiating strategy, but I love the guy. So that was one I think I've probably texted you about him 25 times already to say, hey, what are you doing with him?
That's all.
Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, so I think realistically, when we look at us, I mean, there's always a potential match, as you know, Ryan. But when you make 3 deals with the team in 1 year, we hit a lot of the differing values we have, and now we'd be pulling strength on strength, I think, if we made a deal, which is always fun. But I'm not going to lie to you. I'm probably going to try to pick at some of the other league mates first and see if maybe they love somebody that I don't. But if you need a running back, what I will tell you is, let me just pull up what I have in this league. Dobbins on a 2-year deal, Fournette on it with a year left, Kareem Hunt on a 2-year, Aaron Jones with a year left, and Javonte Williams on now a 4-year deal. So certainly have a stock cabinet there.
Yeah, a wise man once told me not to buy running backs this time of year. So
interesting.
I would Deebo Samuel kind of has my eye more than those running backs.
I would imagine you do. Yeah, Deebo Samuel on a 3-year deal is interesting, isn't it? He went for, I think, as much as I paid for Denzel Mims, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's believable. I mean, really, it felt like nobody saw the Deebo breakout coming, and we knew how talented he was. I mean, he had solid draft capital. But I mean, for me, it was the injuries that scared me away from him. So I was certainly not on Deebo Samuel at all until we really saw what he could do and him maximizing that this past season. So I'm all in now. Of course, it's a little too late. I didn't get the discount you did, and so many others did.
Well, I said I never say never on deals. You know that. So if you wanted to make an offer for Deebo, I would be absolutely listening. I think based on my roster, my 2 highest value assets are Deebo on 3 and Javonte on 4. Those are my blue chippers. I have a lot of hope for Dobbins on a 2-year deal. But yeah, my running backs are very much like we talked about there. It's a redraft set of running backs. Fournette I got for $1. I still love that deal.
Wow.
Yeah, we had some moves there, but overall, my wide receiver core is fairly decimated right now. Like you talked about what a great offseason you had. I have a torn ACL from Beckham. I have Tyreek Hill losing Pat Mahomes. I have Devontae Parker gaining Tyreek Hill. And Cedric Wilson also gaining Tyreek Hill. So it has not been such a great offseason for my wide receivers. So certainly interested in picking up a wideout this offseason, maybe 2. But yeah, let's. I think we will certainly be talking soon.
That sounds good. We can do that.
Perfect. Everyone knows who you are, but anything you want to tell people what we have coming up at DLF? We're rounding out Dynasty Trade Month now. Anything you want to share with the group?
Let's see. We have more rookie and NFL draft coverage that will obviously continue. I think we're just under 5 weeks until the NFL draft now, so excited for that. We also have the Dynasty Draft Guide will be coming out. We released the first version of that last offseason. We've got an updated version coming soon. Addison Hayes and Shane Manila and the guys have been hard at work on that. So hopefully that will be out very soon.
Perfect. And if you liked this podcast and like talking trades, there'll be a Dynasty strategy trade article coming out. I think I'll have it completed this week, where we'll talk about a lot of the strategy that we mentioned on this podcast and kind of how do you land these deals. But more importantly, how do you land a relationship like this where you're making deals and not burning bridges. This is not redraft. These aren't 1 years. Like, you want to have these good feelings, these win-wins. And I think you can tell from the 3 trades that Ryan and I made, there's positive and there's negative. But overall, I think both of us ended up fairly happy with the results in the end, and hopefully do some more this year. And you know that we'll be talking at the very least and seeing if we can make something happen. More than likely not when I'm walking my dog this time. I only make that mistake once, but here we are. So it's always a blast. I love catching up with you, love talking trades. One of the people that I learned from for years. So be able to play in a league with you and, be able to have these conversations is an absolute dream come true for me. So thanks for joining, my friend. And we'll let Gabe take us out from here.
Get down. Turn on the pod, cause we looking alive right now. Peeling it back, take a quick look inside up. All of these analysts, daddy gon' handle this. Know he's a baddie, I know he ain't bad at this. We gon' lay back, talking irrelevance. Why do all that? Just for the hell of it. Hanging with daddy. What's the vibe though? Late night vibes. Hanging with daddy. What's up, Mike? Turn it on right now. I got the remote.